Welcome back, everyone. Today, you're about to witness a story of impossible odds, hidden courage, and a woman who defied everything the world told her she couldn't do. 30 men tried, 30 men failed. Each one left battered, broken, their dreams crushed by a ranch no one could tame. The land was ruthless, unyielding, and the people whispered it was cursed. No one believed anyone could conquer Itan till she appeared. She was overlooked, dismissed, mocked for her size, yet something in her eyes told a different story. Slowly, she stepped onto the property, and the air itself seemed to shift. What happened next would shatter every expectation, challenge every belief, and leave the town speechless. This wasn't just about strength, it was about courage, heart, and a reckoning no one saw coming. If you love stories that touch the heart and leave you breathless, join our journey, subscribe, and become part of our family. And don't forget to like this video so we can share more unforgettable tales together. The sun had barely touched the horizon when the town of Dry Creek awoke to another day of chaos. Dust swirled across the empty streets, carrying with it the faint scent of sweat, horses, and tension. For weeks, the people had been whispering about the impossible task that lay before them, the ranch that no man could tame. 30 men had tried, 30 men had failed, and each time they returned broken, bruised, humiliated, their pride in pieces as the land swallowed their efforts and left them gasping in the dirt. The ranch wasn't cursed, at least not in the way the townsfolk liked to dramatize it. No, it was wild, untamed, relentless, and it demanded more than strength or skill, demanded heart, courage, and a stubbornness most men simply did not possess. Word of yet another failure had reached the saloon before the sun even rose. The faces gathered there told the story of hopelessness, weathered men whose hands trembled, not from age but from defeat, whose eyes carried the weight of watching one man after another fail, against a force they could neither control nor understand. They spoke quietly of the owner, a wealthy rancher who had grown desperate. Every man who entered that sprawling property seeking to master it left with scars, or worse, a deep gnawing emptiness. The whispers painted the ranch as a monster disguised in fields of grass, a living entity that laughed at every attempt to dominate it. No one dared to imagine success, and if they did, the words barely left their lips before they were swallowed by doubt. Yet, among the murmurs of despair, there was a stir of something else, a presence that made a few heads turn, not with mockery, but with disbelief. She walked slowly into the saloon, her frame larger than most of the men gathered, her steps deliberate, her gaze unshakable. The townsfolk had seen her before, never as part of the rumors, never among the braggarts who boasted of skill and left empty. She was quiet, almost invisible in a room full of overconfident men. Yet there was a magnetic force about her, a calm that drew attention whether she sought it or not. Some whispered, some laughed behind her back, labeling her clumsy or heavy, dismissing her presence as a curiosity at best. She was different, undeniably so, and that difference would soon become the only thing anyone remembered. The rancher watched from the back, a tall figure leaning against the doorway, his arms crossed, his face etched with frustration and disbelief. He had seen 30 men try and fail. He had watched their pride evaporate, their muscles strain, their determination crumble like dry clay under the sun. And now, standing before him, was someone who defied every expectation, a woman who, by every measure of logic, should have been ignored, overlooked, even laughed at. Yet the moment she stepped onto that property, something in the air shifted. The wind seemed to still, the horses paused mid-step, and even the old oak trees lining the fence line swayed in a rhythm that felt almost like recognition. There was a quiet power in her, a strength that had nothing to do with speed or brute force, and everything to do with resilience. She didn't speak much, not yet. She asked a single question, her voice low but steady. "Where do I start?" It was simple, almost trivial, yet it carried a weight heavier than any man who had attempted the ranch before. The rancher hesitated. He had grown cynical, suspicious of anyone who dared to try. But something in her eyes, something raw and unflinching, told him she was not to be dismissed. There was an understanding there, a connection with the land, the animals, and the challenge itself that no man had ever shown. It was as if the ranch recognized her, knew she would not falter in the ways others had. The first hours were quiet, almost eerie. The men who had tried before had barged in, yelling, pushing, forcing the land into submission. They had underestimated its rhythm, its subtle cues, its quiet warnings. She, on the other hand, moved slowly, observing, listening, feeling each step of the horses, each rustle of the wind, every shift in the soil. She spoke to the animals, not with commands, but with soft words, a gentle tone that seemed to bridge a gap no human had managed. The ranch responded, not all at once, not immediately, but in small, almost imperceptible ways. A horse would lift its head and watch her instead of bolting. A stubborn calf would pause, uncertain, curious. Each small victory seemed to whisper a promise that had eluded 30 men, that this time, maybe, someone could succeed. By mid-afternoon, a crowd had gathered. Townsfolk peered from windows, leaned against fences, and whispered among themselves. The sight was unusual, almost impossible. A woman, large and unassuming to the untrained eye, moving with a precision, patience, and quiet authority that no man had displayed. The men who had failed before watched with a mixture of envy and disbelief, their pride wounded by the fact that someone they had once dismissed could accomplish what they could not. Murmurs spread like wildfire. "Look at her. She's doing it. How is she doing it?" Questions that had no answers, only the slow, steady proof that action often spoke louder than words or muscle. The sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the ranch. Dust rose behind her as she worked, her movements deliberate, her focus unwavering. There was sweat on her brow, a redness on her cheeks, a heaviness in her steps, but nothing could break her resolve. With every task completed, the impossible began to feel possible. With every animal guided, every fence mended, every field brought into order, the air seemed to pulse with a quiet, unshakable truth. She was not here to fail. She was here to prove something far deeper, far more profound than anyone had dared imagine. By nightfall, the men who had failed sat in the saloon. Their heads hung low, their conversations hushed. Outside, she stood at the edge of the property, the wind tugging at her clothes, her eyes scanning the horizon. The ranch, which had mocked and resisted every attempt, now seemed almost subdued, acknowledging her presence in ways no one could fully explain. The townsfolk stared in awe, disbelief mixing with admiration, and the rancher, who had long given up hope, felt a stir in his chest, a mixture of relief, respect, and an unfamiliar sense of wonder. He realized, in that moment, that the world had shifted slightly, quietly but irrevocably, and that no one would ever forget the day a woman, dismissed and underestimated, took the reins where 30 men had failed. And yet, as she turned to leave the fading light behind her, there was a tension, a shadow lingering at the edges of triumph. Something waited, unseen, a challenge that no single act of courage could fully conquer. The night whispered promises of danger, of trials far greater than guiding horses or fixing fences. And in the stillness, one thought took hold, both thrilling and terrifying. This was only the beginning. Night fell over Dry Creek, but the ranch did not rest. Shadows stretched long across the uneven terrain, and the wind carried an eerie, restless whisper. The animals, usually calmed by her presence during the day, grew skittish as darkness approached, their instincts warning of something unseen. She knew the ranch had given her a foothold, but the real test had only just begun. Every sound in the night felt amplified, the scrape of a branch against a fence post, the low moan of a distant horse, the soft crunch of boots on dry soil. Each one reminded her that this land was alive, and alive things were rarely kind to those who underestimated them. As she worked through the evening, repairing a stubborn gate that no man had managed to fix for weeks, she felt the eyes of the town's skeptics on her back. Their whispers had turned into quiet bets. How long before she, too, failed? She ignored them, but their doubt was like a low, persistent hum in the background, a pressure that made every move heavier, every decision sharper. She had grown accustomed to judgment, but tonight, it had a different weight. Tonight, the ranch itself seemed to push back, testing not just her skill, but her resolve. By midnight, the true challenge revealed itself. One of the horses, a massive stallion that had thrown every man before her, bolted without warning. Its hooves pounded the earth like thunder, its eyes wild with panic. 30 men had tried to calm it, each ending with bruises and bloody hands. She froze for a fraction of a second, feeling the raw fear ripple through her chest, but then she exhaled, grounding herself. Panic had never solved anything. She had learned that watching, understanding, and listening mattered more than force. With a steady voice, she spoke to the stallion, soft and deliberate. every syllable a thread of connection. Slowly, painstakingly, the massive horse slowed, then halted, then allowed her to approach. The men watching from the shadows muttered under their breath, disbelief etched into their expressions. She had faced the impossible once again and succeeded, but relief was fleeting. As she turned to secure the rest of the herd, a sudden crack echoed through the darkness. A portion of the old barn roof, weakened by years of neglect, began to collapse. The beams groaned, threatening to fall on the horses trapped inside. Her heart pounded, not just from fear, but from a surge of responsibility she could not ignore. 30 men had hesitated here, weighed down by uncertainty, and the results had been disastrous. She ran, her heavier frame moving with a surprising swiftness born of desperation, and threw herself against the door, holding it steady as the horses panicked. Dust choked the air, splinters rained down, and for a heartbeat she feared she would fail. But she didn't. She guided the animals out, one by one, her arms straining, her body trembling, yet she never wavered. By the time the last horse stepped onto the moonlit field, she was gasping, sweat streaked across her face, muscles screaming in protest but victorious. The rancher, watching from the shadows, felt something inside him shift. Respect had grown into awe, awe into fear, and fear into a cautious hope. He had never seen determination like this. He had never seen someone fight not for pride, but for connection, for the life of creatures he had long thought impossible to tame. And yet, as he stepped forward to speak, a shadow moved behind her. A figure, cloaked in darkness, had been watching, moving silently, unseen by anyone except her. She felt it instinctively, the prickling awareness of danger that no animal or land could teach. Before she could react, the figure stepped closer, and a cold, hard voice cut through the night air. "I wouldn't be so sure of yourself if I were you." Her body tensed, the night suddenly heavier, filled with unseen threats. This was not the ranch testing hurt, was a human challenge, a confrontation no one had anticipated. The stranger's intentions were unclear, but the menace in his tone was unmistakable. 30 men had cowered in situations far less threatening. Some had even fled, unable to face what lurked in the shadows. She, however, stood her ground, her eyes, reflecting the moonlight, locked onto his, unflinching, unyielding. The ranch had taught her patience and observation, and now, those lessons became weapons against fear. Every muscle in her body screamed for caution, but she knew that hesitation could be more dangerous than action. "What do you want?" she asked, voice steady, betraying none of the adrenaline racing through her veins. The man laughed, low and bitter, a sound that carried the weight of old grudges and unspoken threats. "To see if you're just another fool," he said. "To see if the land has finally found someone to mock, or someone strong enough to survive." There was a cruel satisfaction in his words, a history of failures he had witnessed, perhaps even orchestrated. The rancher stepped closer, unsure whether to intervene, caught between admiration and anxiety. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she scanned the ranch in the pale moonlight, the fields, the fences, the barn that now held signs of the day's struggle. She noticed the subtle shifts, the patterns, the weaknesses that 30 men had ignored or feared. Slowly, deliberately, she moved toward the figure, every step a declaration. She would not be intimidated, she would not falter. Her presence alone seemed to bend the tension in the air, forcing the stranger to pause, forcing him to reconsider. For the first time he saw that she was not defined by size or appearance. She was defined by willpower, resilience, and an understanding of the world around her that no one else possessed. The night stretched on, filled with unspoken threats and silent challenges. She guided the animals back to safety, secured the fences, and surveyed the land, never once taking her eyes off the stranger who lingered on the edge of her awareness. Each task completed, each minor victory, pushed him further back, until he finally spoke again, his tone a mixture of grudging respect and warning. "This isn't over. The land tests more than just hands and strength. It tests heart, and heart is not enough for what comes next." She listened, the words sinking into her like stones, heavy but grounding. She knew he was right. The ranch was more than horses, fences, and fields. It was a living, breathing challenge, and the darkness of the night had revealed that the stakes were far higher than she could have imagined. She also understood that failure was no longer just a personal threat. It could endanger the lives she had begun to protect, and perhaps even the town itself. The first glimmers of dawn began to creep over the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of gold and crimson. She stood in the open field, muscles aching, lungs burning, heart pounding, yet there was a fierce clarity in her gaze. She had survived the night, tamed the untamable, and faced a threat no one else could see coming. But the stranger's final words lingered, a shadow over her triumph, a promise of challenges yet to come. The wind carried them across the ranch, stirring the dust, bending the grass, and whispering a single truth: the hardest part was still ahead. As the townsfolk began to gather once more, drawn by the rumors of the night's events, no one spoke. They only watched, wide-eyed hearts racing. The impossible had been achieved, but at a cost they could not yet understand. And deep within her, a spark of determination burned brighter than ever. She knew the ranch had chosen her for a reason, and she would not let it down. Whatever trials awaited, whatever darkness loomed, she would face them. Because 30 men had failed. Yes, but she had only just begun. The sun rose fully over Dry Creek, casting golden light across the ranch that had tested every ounce of courage, strength, and willpower in 30 men, and yet now belonged, in spirit, to her. She stood at the top of a small rise, overlooking the land she had come to know, the animals she had earned the trust of, and the fences she had restored. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying the distant sounds of the town stirring, curious whispers of awe spreading like wildfire. She breathed deeply, feeling exhaustion and triumph swirl together, a mixture of pain and pride she had never known before. 30 men had failed, but she had endured, not because she was stronger, faster, or braver in the conventional sense, but because she had refused to surrender, refused to let fear or doubt define her. The stranger from the night before emerged from the shadows, his posture stiff, his eyes uncharacteristically cautious. He had watched her through the darkness, waiting to see if she would falter, ready to prove that one woman could not conquer what 30 men could not. But as he approached now, something had changed. He saw not a figure to mock or challenge, but a force of nature, unbroken, commanding, and undeniable. "I didn't think it was possible," he admitted, his voice quiet, heavy with respect. "But you've done it." She met his gaze, a tired but unwavering smile forming. It was not pride she felt, but something deeper, validation, not from him, or the town, or even the ranch, but from herself. She had faced the impossible and had not only survived, she had triumphed. The rancher stepped forward then, a weight lifted from his shoulders that he hadn't realized he had been carrying. "You've changed everything," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "Not just for this land, but for everyone who ever doubted themselves. You've shown them, strength isn't always about size, or speed, or skill. Sometimes it's about heart. Sometimes it's about refusing to quit when the world expects you to fail." The words hung in the air, heavy and profound, and the townsfolk who had gathered slowly approached, faces filled with a mixture of reverence and wonder. They had witnessed history, not in the grand gestures of men who boasted and failed, but in the quiet persistence of a woman who refused to be underestimated. She turned her attention to the animals, patting a massive horse, brushing the mane of a stallion that had once terrified her. Their calm, trusting eyes reflected the journey they had shared, the bond forged not through domination, but through understanding, patience, and respect. A single tear traced down her cheek, catching the light of dawn. She had been underestimated all her life, not just for her size, but for her voice, her choices, her very presence. And here, on this unforgiving land, she had proven that true strength was never measured by appearance, and courage was never limited by expectations. As she walked down the hill toward the crowd, the townsfolk parted in silence, a collective awe holding them breathless. The rancher stepped beside her, offering a hand of respect rather than ownership, and even the stranger nodded, conceding what he had once doubted. And as she looked back at the land, the fences, the animals, the fields now under her care, she understood something that went beyond victory. It wasn't the 30 men who had failed that mattered. It was that she had risen when the world said she could not, and in doing so, had rewritten the story for anyone who had ever been overlooked, dismissed, or told they didn't belong. The wind carried her laughter then, soft but uncontainable, across the ranch, a sound of triumph that would linger long after the day ended. The ranch, once a symbol of impossible challenge, had become a testament to the power of determination, resilience, and heart. And in that quiet, golden morning, one truth rang clearer than any voice in the town. Greatness often comes from the most unexpected places, and the reins of life can belong to anyone brave enough to take them. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Subscribe and join our family of storytellers who believe in courage, heart, and the power of the impossible. Like this video to show your support, and share it so more people can experience a story that reminds us all that strength comes in the most unexpected forms. Together, we keep these stories alive and honor the heroes who inspire us.